you are somebody who supports a PauseAI policy, correct?
Yes.
But at the same time, you would turn around and campaign against any alignment or super alignment research happening now, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
I would like to halt the research enterprise around making super intelligent systems intelligently aligned with their creators' goals.
I feel like I already have so much on my plate saying AI is going to be really powerful. We need to pause AI. The alignment teams aren't doing enough. And now you're adding into the mix. They're actively harmful. They should do less alignment. Like, no, please don't throw this into the mix. Welcome to Doom Debates. My guest today is Stephen Casper, but most people just call him Cas. Cas got his PhD in computer science from MIT, and he's now an incoming public policy professor with a focus on AI safeguards and AI governance at Harvard. Specifically, it's a new tenure-track assistant professorship in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I want you guys to pay attention to what it takes to get on Doom Debates, okay? You gotta have MIT, you gotta have Harvard. We really accept no substitutes here. Cas is also a MATS mentor, one of the top AI alignment and security education programs. He's been involved with the UK AI Safety Institute and also the Center for Human Compatible AI at Berkeley. He's published research in safeguarding AI systems against harmful behaviors, including 61 papers on Google Scholar, 5,000 citations, an H-index of 28. He's gotten the ML Safety Workshop Best Paper Award, and also in TMLR, which is a machine learning journal, he's got Outstanding Paper finalist distinctions. Despite his background being in machine learning, in recent years, he's been focusing in his research on AI governance, including his recent research residency at the UK AI Security Institute. Today, I'm excited to have somebody with a fresh perspective on AI governance and what the real mainline Doom scenario is, because it's going to be different than what you've previously heard on Doom Debates. Cas, welcome to Doom Debates.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks so much. And it's great to have the chance to finally chat.
Likewise, man. That's right. Yeah, we've been seeing each other online and we have never interacted in real life. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's about time.
Yeah. And when did you first get into the whole field of AI safety or rationality or anything adjacent? You could say effective altruism.
Yeah, my path was kind of followed some of these contours a little bit. In my particular case, this all started back in 2018. I read the book Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and I think this has been like a reasonably well-trodden path into thinking a lot about these problems. But I got pretty well convinced that working in the AI space as opposed to the biotech space might be a better pathway or a better opportunity to make the world a bit of a better place. So I pretty quickly cast all my plans aside and threw myself headfirst into the AI safety morass as of 2018. And I got working on some problems involving AI alignment and interpretability kind of early on in that arc of mine. Earlier on, I was pretty mainstream in how I was, learning about things from a Bostromian lens and a maybe Yudkowskian lens a little bit to, thinking more critically in 2022 and 2023. And I was not the only one to do this, about how the AI space might be more bottlenecked by our ability to govern well, as opposed to our ability to develop the types of risk management tools that, are really going to be approximately, foolproof.
Right. So you first started reading Bostrom, and also that took you to Yudkowsky, right? Back in 2018, correct?
Yeah, you've heard it all. But I had my time with thinking through and kind of marinating in rationalist-related and effective altruism-related kind of ideas in that community a bit. And, I think this today, you could consider me EA adjacent. Or I'm still all about high impact work, not necessarily all about the community though.
All right, nice. And so that brings us to today, 2026, when you just got your PhD in computer science from MIT. Not bad. And your PhD focused on tampering with AI models' internal computations to evaluate and safeguard them. Correct? Is that kind of like a interpretability, mechanistic interpretability?
A bit. It's the kind of thing. Well, it's certainly very, very closely related. I had to have a whole section on this in my thesis, for example. It's certainly mechanistic. It's less interpretability. But this kind of work is my bread and butter. It involves model internals, as many agendas do. But the computer science kind of core work that I focuses on model tampering or model tampering attacks. And my thesis and much of my work throughout grad school was all about using model tampering attacks for evaluations and for defense. So if you want to evaluate a model using a model tampering attack, you will evaluate its ability to behave harmfully, even when there is some sort of adversarial process manipulating the internal states of that model or manipulating the weights of that model. And these are pretty powerful attacks, as you might imagine. If you want to use model tampering attacks in order to make a model safer, we can train models under these types of tampering attacks and test them under these types of tampering attacks too. And all of this can strengthen the toolbox, or by giving you some sharper tools, you might say, for trying to elicit and assess harmful behaviors in LLMs. And I'm pretty excited about this work still. And the main kind of technical leg of my agenda going forward is focused on trying to make AI safeguards that are robust enough and that run deep enough in order to work very well for open weight models, even when some adversarial process or adversarial user might be trying to fine tune that openly available model on harmful data. And if we're able to make some more progress on this in the next few years, if the field is able to 10x the type of tamper-resistant robustness that we can get from open models and make them that much safer, I think, and this might be a good hot take to start on, I think that it might be the case that by then, when we have a good open model safety toolbox, the technical problems underpinning AI safety might be sufficiently well solved such that I might leave technical safeguards research and just go into governance 100%. Because right now I'm only about 50%.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So I think a big focus of the conversation is just comparing our mainline scenarios, because we both read a lot of the same stuff and respect a lot of different smart people who are opining. None of us are like dismissive of any particular camp. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, with maybe a couple of exceptions. But most of these exceptions, are shit posters on Twitter or something like that.
Exactly. And yet, even though we both seem like we're in the same milieu and we're both reasonable people, it seems like we have a discrepancy in our P-Doom. You ready to hash this out?
I'm very happy to.
P-Doom, what's your P-Doom? What's your P-Doom? What's your P-Doom?
Stephen Casper, aka Cas. Can I call you Cas?
Sure thing.
What's your P-Doom?
I think my P-Doom lies somewhere between 5 and 10%, which I have found is a really interesting type of P-Doom to have, like socially. Because depending on what type of room I'm in, I'm either a total doomer or I am one of the most anti-doom people sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think that a P-Doom of 5 to 10% is plenty enough for the doom to dominate the impact calculus. And so long as you believe that meaningful actions can be taken to kind of move the needle within that neighborhood, then preventing existential risk lies distinctly as our biggest priority. Something we'll probably talk about at some point might be some of my reasonably warm takes, I think, about how even if we care about doom principally, that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't be engaging in like what we'd consider to be near-termist or myopically unimpactful or relatively unimpactful work.
Fair enough. Well, I don't disagree with anything you've said. Like, 5% chance, 5 to 10% chance is incredibly alarming and we should shape policy around it. But it's also a little bit patronizing to people like me who are saying, I have like a 50% P-Doom in that ballpark, which is significantly higher than just 5 to 10%. It's like an order of magnitude higher. So I will say, okay, you're still in the sane zone. The minimum qualification to have a P-Doom that I consider to be in the sane range is 5 to 10%. Okay, so I don't think you're being insane. I respect what you're saying. But it's also like a bittersweet situation for me when you're being like, Liron, you're 5 to 10%, you're totally under it. I'm like, really, just 5 to 10? Because if it's 5 to 10%, I start to become an accelerationist myself and be like, okay, yes, we're doomed with 5% to 10% probability, but there's so many other problems that might extinct us, like nuclear doom. The probability of nuclear doom in the next century, I think, is at least 5 to 10%. And I actually think that a good AI could save us from nuclear doom, right? It could help us coordinate to not blow ourselves up. So the moment you tell me P of AI doom is only 5 to 10%, I stopped being passionate about the cause of avoiding AI doom, and I started asking, like, what can AI do for me, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there's nothing I can't respect here. A couple things to say. One of them is that my 5 to 10% number is, I think, most precisely operationalized by saying, I think subjectively, the thing that would reflect my degree of surprise is a 5 to 10% probability on an event that causes the death of more than 90% of humans in the 21st century that is AI triggered, right? Including a possibly systemic event. So, things could get kind of, I'm discounting enough things that happen after 2100. But to get at the crux of things, I think your argument about whether or not accelerationist considerations kind of outweigh at that point. There might be some sort of crux or some sort of substantive disagreement that we might have in our expectations, at least, around how much of a silver bullet AI is really going to be toward being able to solve very big problems like nuclear doom. I think those probably won't go away. I struggle to think of how a very powerful AI system, without stopping short of it instituting some sort of pretty totalitarian global regime, would be able to solve problems like nuclear. The problems that we have involving nuclear safety, as I'm later going to talk about, are analogous to lots of our AI safety problems, are institutional ones, and ones that just involve power struggles between powers in the world. And I struggle to think about how AI could get rid of those root issues of nuclear involving nuclear safety. And I find it much easier to think about how creating immense concentrations of power using immensely powerful technology, I find it much easier to think about how that could exacerbate the types of problems that lead to large-scale, very destructive human conflict.
All right, well, we'll definitely be diving into that.
Yes, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but this also is a little bit in line with the meat of my character arc or my research arc. One of the ways of kind of describing my pivot or my inflection point back in 2023 just involved me asking myself a question, which I think is healthy. I hope other people ask themselves this question too. And the question is, suppose that an AI system causes a catastrophe sometime in the future. How likely is it that the events leading up to that catastrophe were triggered by a set of benevolent people exercising what would be considered best technical practices for safety at the time? And I think the chances of that are reasonably low relative to the chances that the catastrophe is caused by systemic effects or negligence or simple bad actors. I think the histories of other technologies like nuclear, suggest that things don't all usually go wrong when the person at the trigger or when the person at the helm was responsible and benevolent entirely.
Right. Okay. Well, this implies that you also think that there's not going to be that many powerful, irresponsible people because you net out at only a 5 to 10% PDoom.
Maybe. Although I do actually think that the reason my PDoom is maybe lower than others involves, it hinges more on how I actually think that the intelligence ceiling might not be that high. And I don't think this for every domain. For example, AI systems seem like they might be like superhuman in math. Right now even, but certainly a few years from now, AI systems might be doing things in like domains like math that humans today would like maybe just like at a certain point stop being able to comprehend or verify very rigorously. But when it comes to the types of power or capacities or intelligence that a system might need to like take over the world, for example, I think that there might be a ceiling here that's not that much higher than what normal like human companies or human governments or human individuals are really able to ascertain. And that's not saying that the ceiling is too low to be extremely devastating. I think it's plenty high to be devastating. But I think that for an AI system to take over the world, it would need to game power structures that exist in the world that have explicitly designed and been evolved in many ways to mitigate the ability of some individual person or company to just suddenly get a lot of power. Like there is a lot of power in a lot of structure in the world, and the world's like natural human institutions have lots of checks against power. And one of the reasons why we can kind of like know this, or why this is just generally true, is that there aren't that many examples in history in which, one person or one company was just able to take over everything in a region. And when they were able to take over everything in a region, there's always kind of been a sort of failure to take over everything, take over the rest of the world. I think it is worth appreciating that it does seem pretty difficult empirically for that kind of system to be gamed. Like if there is an AI system that is like vastly smarter than any human expert on anything, I very much would not take for granted that, and I would somewhat doubt that we should expect this to come along with the ability to like successfully subvert power structures in the world holistically.
You're saying we should doubt that? We shouldn't expect that?
I think we should not expect it to happen in a way that adheres to a particularly clear story, or in a way that does not involve like 1,000 institutional or systemic faults along the way. Yeah.
Okay, this seems like a major crux between you and a lot of the doomers in that case, a lot of the higher P doomers. You said it, I was going to go there, and you already anticipated it. I think your own words are the intelligence ceiling might not be that high. I think that's a crux, man. I think that's a crux. Like, you really think that the human brain, right? Like this 3-pound, 20-watt piece of meat with chemical neurotransmitters is close to the intelligence ceiling?
Yeah, I guess this one's a little bit hard to be too confident about. I think I need to have the right amount of humility here, and this is something I'm gonna refuse to lean into for the sake of spicy debate. I'm gonna cover. I think everyone's ass
Right.
needs to be appropriately covered when speculating here, because there is an unknown aspect to it. Right. There is, it is really hard, like epistemically, kind of fundamentally, to try to use your own brain to reason about like the intelligence ceiling in a very philosophical way.
Yeah, here, let me just do an intuition. I got a little intuition pump, okay? Think about all of the cognitive work that Einstein did to come up with special relativity, okay? Like the first genius thing, let's say it took him 6 months of work or whatever, right? Like, let's say it took him like hundreds of hours worth of like focused thought or whatever, okay? Don't you think that there can just be an AI that does that in like a couple seconds?
I don't dispute that. I don't dispute that.
Hmm.
I would not be surprised, if years from now, even months from now, we see AI systems, just do mind-bending shit in domains like math and physics and computer science, or
Okay.
improve the ways self-improve substantially even. But even conditional on seeing that, I would be surprised if a system by itself was able to, in a according to some sort of clean story, reasonably rapidly, monolithically take over the world, in a sense.
Okay, let's unpack this term power structures, right? Because my own ontology is more fluid, where like I just see the world as just like made up of states, like, okay, navigate to this state. Oh, this state is like you're in power, cool, right? Or like, oh, this state is you have more karma points on the social network or whatever, right? Like, to me, it's just all part of the video game, right? I don't see this whole power structure. Like, it's just my own ontology, right? The way I chunk the world.
Mhm.
I don't really make much of power structures because, think about things like celebrities becoming politicians, right? That used to not be allowed, right? You used to have politician experience to be a politician. And then it turns out you can just be a celebrity and just instantly become a politician, right? Trump showed us that. I think there's been a number of other celebrity politicians, but Trump has got to be like the number one example where people are like, yeah, experience doesn't matter anymore. So I think that there's shortcuts, right, to what we think of as like these established power structures. And I think that the AI will be like a good shortcut finder.
It might be a good shortcut finder, but I will say a couple things. One is that there have been a lot of very ambitious, very well-resourced people and countries and companies in the history of the world who have put a lot of effort into accruing lots and lots of power, some with no particular ceiling to their ambitions, right? Think of the most world domination ambitious regimes that have existed in history. Something always stopped them. And as an intelligent AI system replacing something like this, and I might not have all of the limits that humans have, but something still might stop them. Another point that I'd make is that power does not generally accumulate particularly fast politically, economically, and institutionally in the world. Usually things grow on the scales of like when they're the fastest, like a matter of months. And my doubt of the ability for some sort of very intelligent like AI apparatus to take over, the world very quickly is, I think, somewhat hingy for me, because slow takeovers, where you could imagine data centers being built, or network after network gradually kind of being taken over in the world, for example. The kind of sci-fi inspired thing that we like to think about a lot of the time. This kind of thing would happen, I think, necessarily slowly. There are a lot of bottlenecks to making something like this happen. And because it happens slowly, I think that other powers in the world, other companies, other governments, people will be able to know what's happening. And some sort of takeover, assuming that it's not very, very rapid, I think would be the kind of thing that we could see political and economic mobilization against.
Well, in your mental model of power structures, I wonder how much of the difficulty of penetrating them is already present in today's power structures, because you mentioned, oh, we evolved them over so long, right? They've got so many evolutionary battle scars or whatever, right? That makes them robust. Or how much of the power is coming in the future, right? As we get this new equilibrium where everybody's got their own AI, and the equilibrium of future AIs is what makes future power structures robust. So what are your thoughts? How much of the robustness is already there today?
I'm glad you brought this up. And one short answer to what you said is that I think the more decentralization of power we have, I hate using the word democratization, but sure, the more democratization we have of access to technology in the world, that will generally, I think, tend more often than not toward more resilience. But the main reason I'm glad you brought this up is because I think it reflects certainly something that dominates my PDoom, and possibly something that plays a large part in yours. I think that most of the risk, most of the pathways to some sort of very globally devastatingly catastrophic outcome involving an AI triggered disaster are deeply, deeply abjectly systemic. We like to think about singularities or superintelligent optimizers as parts of very kind of clean stories, being the protagonist of some sort of story where it just goes and takes over the world or something, right? We've heard the story before. It's a bit Bostromian and Yudkowskian, and this is kind of embedded into the ways that we like to model doom and model doom scenarios. And it is sci-fi inspired, and I'm not saying that in a pejorative way. I'm saying that in a descriptive way. And again, I think it's worth taking these things seriously. But I do expect that if terrible things happen from AI, they are probably not going to be instigated by a single system or a single person. I don't think they're going to happen particularly quickly. And I just think that we're going to see the things that I think would cause doom would be the result of some sort of, hard to predict, diffuse, nebulous cascade of impacts that ends up being the grotesque consequence of a handful of companies and governments with immensely powerful systems in perverse competitions with each other. And something like you mentioned too, I think systemic things will also happen on a micro scale. In the same way that social media has deeply infected the social fabric of the world, I expect that AI will deeply infiltrate the social and economic fabric of the world in ways that are immensely powerful but systemic. And I just can see them turning up the temperature on the world with respect to conflict and crisis and disasters.
Well, okay, I'm actually still trying to clarify. Let me go back to a discussion I had recently on the show with Mike Israetel, where I was challenging him that to me it seems like our civilization has us pants down. And he was saying that because of AI, we're actually going to be using it to pull our pants up really hard into our assholes. I don't remember if he also got his PhD from Harvard, from MIT, but that was his thesis, that future AI is actually what's going to defend us. And I want to clarify with you, do you also think it's all about future AI defending our civilization? Or do you really think that super intelligent AI would have much difficulty conquering the world of today?
For what it's worth, not knowing the guy, I would probably guess that type of analogy would come more from a Harvard person than an MIT person.
Okay.
I'll just put that out there. And I think that we are probably at a point in time in which some types of optimism about some types of defensive uses of AI in the right people's hands is not really an armchair argument anymore, so much as it is just something to point to, like an empirical phenomenon that we can look at, principally ushered in by mythos, right? Where we're seeing mythos go, I'm not sure this is the best world, but certainly like not the worst, far from the worst, where we're seeing Mythos used non-diffusely by some of the right actors in order to try to get a defensive head start in the AI cyber domain. And this is really nice. And we could see the same kind of thing play out. And as much as anyone else, I really like the idea of benevolently developed and smartly deployed AI systems that act as guardians against different types of risks. But I don't expect this to be the dominant effect that AI has on the space, on the ecosystem. And I'll point to an example. So just at the same time that we are seeing Mythos become a great example of, potentially a great example or case study in how AI can be deployed and developed in ways that reasonably well, differentiably empower defenders, we're also seeing AI exacerbating geopolitical tensions, or just maybe creating entire new ones, or kind of complexifying the areas of conflict. The US and China is the most obvious example to point to here, and I guess Taiwan is an interesting chapter of that book as well, where to most people's dismay, I think, most people in the risk management space, we're watching AI, this powerful technology being developed in parallel in two countries in some sort of, prisoner's dilemma or game of chicken, depending on what type of, exact scenario you want to model and what particular way. And I think that according to my subjective expectations, I do think that we're going to see more of AI exacerbating and turning up the temperature on conflicts.
Right. Okay, but remember, I'm actually still trying to drill down on this question, though, right? Of just because you still use the phrase that you don't think the intelligence ceiling is that high, right? That's your guess. And so the way I'd operationalize the question is, if you had a superintelligence from 100 years in the future, right? I think you believe in a lot of AI progress in the next 100 years. So you bring the most powerful superintelligence that can fit in, let's say, a modern data center, okay? Just you get one modern data center with the most optimized algorithm from one 2026 data center running the best code, right? The best distilled model from 2126 going back in time. You don't think that data center could like start a revolution that could conquer the whole species? And by start a revolution, I also mean like spread viruses and stuff, computer viruses.
Yeah. And I think the virus point is a good one. I think it could be very powerful to enable all sorts of naughtiness. But there is certainly a lot of room in my posteriors for this. My priors for this.
But what do you think is the chance, right? Because to me, I think the chance is like 85% that this is the power of intelligence.
Oh, I'd probably say less than 25.
Less than 25. Okay, so you are basically you are like a super intelligent skeptic by my definition.
Yeah. And it's not, and like even assuming that the AI system were able to synthesize potentially devastating pathogens, even assuming that it were able to manipulate people that were pretty smart and trying not to be manipulated, and even assuming that the AI system could implement devastating cyber attacks in like any cyber infrastructure in the world. Even assuming that, I struggle to think. Well, no. I can imagine, but struggle to place a more than 50% probability on a system like this, even if we're just dropped into the vulnerable world that we're currently living in, as being one that, I should make the distinction between would or could. Even could be subversive enough to result in some sort of takeover. And I think that's a little bit of a testament to some of what I was just describing earlier about how much belief I have in the ability of power to check power as it currently exists in the world. I could be wrong, though.
Yeah, okay, well, this reminds me of some of the tech folks I see on Twitter where they're like, you guys can't be serious comparing artificial intelligence to nuclear weapons. That's got to be hyperbolic. How could, realistically, how could it be as dangerous as a nuke? And I think my analogy tells you the very precise sense in which I think it's equally dangerous, which is, if you, like I said, one data center, right? So that data center is kind of like the casing of a nuclear weapon, right? Because it's literally, in my scenario, it's something that you put it down, right? You press that trigger button and you lose the world, right? You lose control over the world. That's what I claim. But you could respond as you did and you're like, I don't see the causality, right? I don't think that any configuration of bits in a data center would be as potent to reshaping the world as, distributing 50 nuclear bombs all over the world, right? That's basically your claim.
Oh, you're such a good Crux artist. This is great. Yeah. So I think you've gotten me to a point in which, and you're pressing me pretty hard on this, which I think is good. And I see the counterpoint very clearly, right? Like, I think I could not be so epistemically responsible to think that there's not a configuration of bits that could power an agent that messes things up globally, permanently. That's so easy for me to imagine with the, the types of error bars that are necessary to reason about a situation like this. However, I'm going to stick with putting an emphasis on how much is it the right word, faith, how much belief I have in power to check power in the world. But at this point, I think it's useful to back up slightly, because we're in a situation that's a little bit contrived, usefully contrived, but there's a gap between this and the types of realistic decisions we'll be up against in the next few years. And also I think how much belief we have in this is not the most politically salient thing. Because if we're worried about AI systems being super, super, super powerful, most of the political playbook remains the same, regardless of whether we put a 75% probability on something like this or a 25%. Not to end the debate, not to cause a diversion. I don't want to sound like I'm doing that.
And you're comfortable putting at least a 25% chance that what I would describe as superintelligence being extremely real and potent. Okay.
I'm comfortable putting at least a 25% chance on that.
Okay, at least a 25%. All right. I mean, 25% is enough. If you'd been like, don't worry, Liron, I give you a 5% chance, I'd be like, come on, so patronizing. Like it's great that you're being sane. It would be worse if you pulled a Jan LeCun and were like 0.01% or whatever, right? I'd be like, come on, you're not even being sane. I would describe it as sane but patronizing, but you're doing better. You're giving me a solid 25% chance.
Yeah, this is one of those situations I described earlier where, depending on the room I'm in, I sometimes am like a total doomer, or sometimes I'm a total optimist. Yeah. Standing next to you, my optimism side is coming out. Well, is the word optimism? It's not optimism. My non-doomerism.
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. There's different pieces to this. So then going back to the question of like you finding it hard to imagine that a single AI, right, or like one terrorist or one project gone awry is going to suddenly upend all the power structures, right, and just kind of like destroy things on kind of one narrative or whatever, right? A clean narrative, I think was your phrase. Like you find that hard to imagine. It sounds like maybe it kind of breaks down half and half, where like half of your skepticism is you're not even sure that superintelligent AI could come back to the present and dismantle our power structures. And then the other half is like, well, in the future, it's going to be even harder to dismantle our power structures, right? You're kind of like spreading the skepticism. I
think that's a pretty good assessment. I almost said diagnosis. I think it's a decent assessment of how I think about things. But okay. everything comes with a good error bar in my case, which is part of the way I think about these things. Because if you expect the problems to be systemic, you should also expect them to be relatively unpredictable. In the same way that what social media and the internet have done to the world were pretty unpredictable with respect to human knowledge in the year 2000, for example.
Right. For me to try to engage with the factors of your belief state, you can ask me the hypothetical like, hey, what if we did live in the world where Cas was right and modern 2026 power structures turn out to actually be really, really hard for superintelligence to undermine? That would be such a huge update for me, right? And that would probably then update what I think about the future. I'd be like, wow, I bet power structures are still going to be like really robust in the future. But that's not really what I think. That's not my current belief state. And the phrase comes to mind, Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
I think, people who look around and feel the intuition that anything about modern society is robust, they could really use don't write in and say that doomers are violent guys, but they could really use a good nuclear bomb dropped on their city. Okay, because I just think, we've gone so complacent since World War II, right? Just because we barely by the skin of our teeth managed not to nuke ourselves. Throw down one nuclear bomb in Chicago or anything like that. I think people's intuitions about the robustness of modern institutions are in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, I think they are. But most of what can go wrong for us is probably going to be deeply systemic. To be as precise as I can about how I really think, if I wanted to like place chips down right now, how AI might go terribly in the world, I think it would be, my bet right now would be on a slow burn and gradual disempowerment and our epistemics globally getting undermined by very powerful systems that we interact with. Not those AI systems themselves having the wrong goals, but the business models behind them and the institutional structures behind them having goals that are out of alignment with like human progress and flourishing and intellectual development. And we just get to a world in which there are immense concentrations of power and there are immense diffusions of responsibility at the same time. And bad and negligent decisions, start to cause those types of catastrophes. And depending on how far along we get here, some of it might be too late. I'm not trying to, but I'm not trying to like invoke the idea of a little bit of an idiocracy in the future.
You'd use the term idiocracy to refer to your mainline doom scenario?
I wouldn't describe my scenario as an idiocracy, but I would describe it as Idiocracy-Inspired.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm happy to humor you, right? I mean, I've busted out my first objection, which is we seem to have like a different mental model of like power structures and superintelligence. But putting that aside, right? Let's humor you. Let's dive into the Cas mainline doom scenario, right? Basically, like if we roll the dice and just like let reality play out in like the single most likely way. The single most likely way, first of all, I should say the mainline scenario in your mind is not a doom scenario, right? Like humanity overall is currently on a good track in your mind, correct?
I don't know if I describe it as a good track, but I describe it as a non-doom track. Yeah.
Yeah, what is your mainline scenario? Because it can't, like I said, it can't be a doom scenario because you only gave 5%, a 5 to 10% chance of p-doom, right? So where do you see humanity most likely, like in 100 years?
I think the way I expect, most futures to go is somewhat reflected in how I'm inclined to emphasize, and I'm not, many people do this. I'm not the only one, obviously, but I'm inclined to emphasize AI in its aspect and capacity as a social technology and not just as a particular type of tool. So what we should expect from AI, I think, is a very like systemic, gradual takeover and an entanglement of like what we do, and how we interact digitally online and what we know and what we learn. So many headlines of the past few years are like good, I think, harbingers of how AI is creeping into our institutions. David Duvenot, who you had on the podcast, is a much better person to talk about these things with. But the fact that Grok looks at everything on X and does moderation and thumbs the scales of what's happening in that marketplace of ideas, or how many students are using AI systems to do their homework. I think all of these things are likely to lead us to some sort of like death by 1,000 cuts.
Okay, well, maybe just those cuts certainly seem small, right? Though they seem like cuts that you need 1,000 of, right? Because it's like, oh my God, Grok's going to do our homework, but you use Idiocracy. So are you saying they all add up on, or like a WALL-E situation, right? So it's just like humans just become like so powerless because we've lost kind of like agency or motivation. Like, how would you describe the problem?
Yeah, here's a way that I should have described it earlier. Now, I should have just said this now that I think to say this. Like, I think you could describe like my modal outcome as being a gradual disempowerment scenario that doesn't necessarily lead to extinction, but certainly turns up the temperature on extinction risks. And that is where I think most of my P-doom comes from. I think that if doom happens and, more than 90% of people die in 2020, the 21st century, I expect it to happen in a world that is more vulnerable than the world we currently have, due in large part to AI.
Okay, well, hold on. You're mentioning doom again, right? But I still want to hear the mainline scenario, right? And the mainline scenario means not doom, right? So just tell me about this not. So it's like a not doom world, but we're still dying by 1,000 cuts. Like, I'm just a little confused.
Well, suppose AI goes badly. Maybe I don't hold me to this number, but say like Cas thinks there's a 50% chance that AI kind of sucks in the future, makes the world worse or whatever, right? So suppose condition on that future where AI goes badly. I think maybe 80% of the time when it goes badly, it's going to go badly without killing everyone. But and it is systemically by not killing everyone. And 20% of the time it goes badly systemically in ways that contribute to killing everyone. By creating, single points of failure and large concentrations of power.
Okay, just to clarify, so your mainline scenario is kind of described as AI goes badly, but then we survive, and so it doesn't kill everybody, but it's gone badly. This is your mainline scenario?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so now we're living in this post-AI gone badly, non-doom world, and it kind of looks like Idiocracy.
A little bit.
Okay. Now, when I think of gradual disempowerment, I see that as a little bit different from Idiocracy because Idiocracy at least has like very interesting power dynamics. It reminds me of WALL-E, which is just like, people just kind of like don't care or they're checked out, compared to Gradual Disempowerment, which is like, oh, maybe they're ambitious and they want power, but they've just completely lost any access to levers of power because they're just mush brains, and like the real intelligence is just like doing its own stuff and they just don't have access to controlling it.
I don't think of things differently. And I think that type of world is plausible, is survivable, but is very, very, very vulnerable all at the same time.
It's vulnerable, but so I mean, this is just an interesting, because the fact that you're still labeling it as low P Doom, I feel like there's almost like another shoe that's going to drop. So it's like even your low P Doom world is like vulnerable to actually becoming doomed, but that seemed like that should multiply into your P Doom and make it higher.
I could imagine thinking about these things, modeling things in this kind of way that we're delving into. Oh my God, I just said the word delve. Okay. I could imagine modeling things this way as, resulting in, depending on how people parameterize their model, in a bit of a bimodal distributions of P Doom. I think that's fair. And I think I'm a little bit less doomy than you probably are, but I feel like it is very much worth emphasizing.
Yeah, let's dig in more into the scenario. Okay, I'll stop with the gotchas on what the real P Doom probability is, because it's, what does that even mean, doom? How bad does life have to be before it's doom? So we won't even necessarily nitpick the exact definitions there, but let's just dive into like a qualitative mainline description, right? So you have to pick one description. Like you used Idiocracy as like one kind of visual, right? One fleshing out of the situation. But like, how about just pick, right? Flesh it out one particular way and give me some details.
Let's think. All right. So let's fast forward 5 or 10 years, and we have a multipolar world, which is maybe a whole separate discussion. Hopefully not a long one if we get there. We don't need to get there. But the world I expect. I think all the precedents suggest that we're going to end up in a multipolar world with AI. At least, any world that survives long enough is going to become a multipolar world.
Okay, so your mainline scenario is there's lots of different AI companies or AI like holders of the power of AI.
Yeah, so imagine a world where there are 10 companies that make extremely powerful closed-weight AI systems, and they're concentrated in 3 or 4 countries, and mainly 2, US and China. And at the same time, there are thousands of open-weight models in the world that have capabilities just below those of the safeguarded open-weight models, right? So I imagine a world like this, a world where certain actors here just have a lot of power. The CEO and advisory boards for some of these companies do, the executives inside of these countries do, and the terrorists, the lone wolves, or the cells in the world who have enough technical competence to misuse an open weight AI system, can have disproportionate amounts of certain types of power. So I imagine a world like this could be very plausible 10 years away or something like that. Oh, and simultaneously, we should expect a world like this to have facilitated the ongoing, like deep frying of many humans' brains that internet and social media has already done to them, and the news ecosystem has, right? I think we should expect AI to continue to increase in how much it is used as a tool of manipulation. So I think we have a world in which, some terrorists, some company people, and some country people just have a lot of power to manipulate a lot of people and have a lot of money and are in conflict with each other or struggle with each other explicitly or implicitly to get more power economically or militarily. And a world like that seems a little bit like a powder keg of conflict, whether caused by the AI or whether not. I think the most important thing is that a world like that is like made more of a powder keg by how much power AI confers and centralizes.
Right. And when you say powder keg and conflict, you don't imagine that the outcome of the conflict is like, the planet's a wasteland. You just imagine that the outcome is like, well, we've now shot up to gradual disempowerment. We were going to try to do something nicer, but now we just got this kind of default doom adjacent outcome of gradual disempowerment, which is hard to steer away from in your view.
I think everything from a Cold War to wasteland is easily plausible here. But yeah, I don't necessarily expect that wasteland is like the 80% outcome here. In this kind of scenario, right. I expect that.
Okay.
We'll see more power struggles and cold wars, and they'll suck.
Just to recap, if I understand correctly, right, there's this concept of the doom train. Like I got this train behind me here. It represents, the different stops of the argument.
I'm so glad you pulled out the doom train.
Yeah, we got the doom train of different reasons why people can think we're doomed. It seems like you're pretty you've ridden past a couple of the early stops because you're kind of riding past the stop of ASI being that powerful. I mean, you gave me like 25%, right? But like most of your probability is like, ASI, it's still something that we can kind of like slap around if we try hard enough, right? That's kind of like roughly where your head is. Our power structures can, it's not going to penetrate our power structures too hard, right? So you're kind of riding past the stop of ASI being like that godlike, let's say. And then also, it seems you're also, I think, explicitly riding past the stop of like, we're never going to solve individual AI line, right? I think this came up earlier. And that's why you're so focused on like these later stops of like, hey, there are later stops that I'm not sure I want to get off on, right? These are real concerns about like future group level power dynamics of AI. And you think that's really where people should be focused because you're just not that worried. Or you know what? I think I used the wrong. I think you are actually getting off at the earlier stops, but also you don't think people should get off at the later stops, right?
I think I'm following. I'm following the stop train story to all of this.
Right, because getting off means you think that's a reason to not worry. So you're not worried yet. Yeah, but this actually sucks because somebody who gets off at the earlier stop still might have reason to like get back on. So I got to rethink the analogy, but you get what I'm saying.
I think we're on the same page.
Right. You know what? I think this is I think I got the analogy. Okay, I got the analogy. You just started at a later station, so you're actually getting on at a later station, and you're still riding to Doomtown, but you just didn't ride. You were a late pickup.
If you'll have me, I'd love to be in Doomtown. Yeah.
Exactly right. Okay. All right. So we solved that, and you say that's an accurate characterization where you do think that like this short Doom train, right? The second half of the Doom train is where a lot of action is.
I think so. And I talk about this with people a lot. You are as familiar as I am with this. When people will ask you, "Oh, what are your timelines? Are you a short timelines person? Are you a long timelines person?" My answer to this used to be that I'm a short timelines person, but the error bars are huge. Now my answer to it tries to be a little bit more subversive. I think lately I call myself an anti-timelines person, which is related to what you're saying. And the reason I'm an anti-timelines person is partly to emphasize that this whole AI risk management thing is a never-ending problem, and that's not to say that there won't be a period of acute risks. A period in which we're getting accustomed to rapidly intensifying and developing and integrating technologies, where the probability of us triggering some sort of catastrophe at any given year is going to be elevated with respect to compared to the future if we survive that long. But I do not think that the period of acute risk is going to be particularly remarkable in some sort of millenarian or singularity flavored way. We can think of a curve over time where the y-axis is the probability density and the x-axis is time. And we're talking about the probability density of going extinct in that particular year, right? So, this curve will eventually sum to 1. If it will integrate to 1 if we take the x-axis out forever.
But if we pull our cards right, it's like we push it to a lump of probability like a quadrillion years in the future, right? That's how you do it right.
Yeah. So the difference between me as like an anti-timelines person and other people who I think are more inclined to traffic in talking in terms of timelines is whether or not this curve peaks relatively low and gradually slows down or gradually goes to 0, or like I think, or whether this curve peaks particularly high.
Right. When you said peaks low and goes to 0, though, I'm just remembering what you said about how it has to add up to 1, right? So I'm saying like a quadrillion years from now it has like a big spike, right? Like the latest possible time that we're doomed.
Well, I guess it could, but I don't think this reflects most people's beliefs if you'd aggregate them, right? So I think the doom curve, we call it doom curve. Maybe you'd like that, but I think it's going to peak low.
Okay.
Instead of peaking particularly high. Like I don't think we're gonna, I don't think that getting through a particular decade in the human future or human future history, is going to be a really good indicator that we're gonna be in good shape from then on.
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, though. I think I could let me just rephrase in layman's terms, okay? Because I suspect some math people or some non-mathy people might have dropped off.
Sure.
Okay. I think what you're saying is just that, like, you don't think like you kind of think this is a critical time in terms of like this is like a above average time where we better get things right in terms of like aligning AIs to the people working on them, right? Don't have like a runaway AI. You think there's like some concern to avoid that, but it's not like so huge overshadowing everything because in your mind, if anything, there's like a bigger concern after we get that right.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's a bigger concern, but over time, it's a bigger concern. You know,
If you add up like the next 50 years, yeah.
yeah. Maybe the simplest way to put it is that, like, I think nuclear is still a reasonable analogy. The '60s sucked from a risk standpoint,
Yeah.
but the fact that we made it through the '60s does not mean that we should like take comfort in like being kind of like safe from nuclear risk, because the world is always going to be vulnerable to nuclear risk forever, and it's not because of technological alignment problems. It's because of deeply human and institutional problems.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I understand your perspective. And so there's still two things I want to dive further into the Cas worldview and not even debate it per se, right? Just really understand your wisdom, basically, because obviously you've put many years into this, right? You've thought deeply about it, and it's really hard to find anybody who's done more research or thought more deeply about it, right? So I want to make sure we're getting the riches here of your hard work. So when it comes to doom scenario, so just to review, gradual disempowerment, one problem could be like a larger version of all the ills we're seeing right now of people being like so lazy and like incapable of doing anything, right? Like couch potatoes who have like no achievements because it's all meaningless and there's no reason to get up in the morning. Like that's one problem that you're concerned about. And then another problem is like economically, right? Like it's a precarious situation because if like the laws ever change, right? If the ruling class, whatever the ruling party was, ever like soured on us, we're screwed because we have no power, right? Is that kind of a good overview of like the bad gradual disempowerment scenario you're worried about?
I'm following you. I'm with you here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like that represents like a situation that you think is like a big chunk of the probability mass, like in flavor, that we're trying to steer away from. That and that's kind of like what you focus on, right? Like you are trying to steer humanity away from something like that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I'm glad we're getting to this part of the discussion, which arguably maybe, like should be most parts of most discussions here, because, the P doom doesn't matter so much as the delta on that P that, we think is possible to induce by taking different actions, right? Like it's not where the P baseline, the probability of doom baseline is. It should be like the most important thing to talk about is like how much can we affect that and how can we make that go lower. And we've been talking about a lot about systemic problems and institutional problems and power today. I hope it's okay that I've steered things that way. And as you might imagine, the things I'm most optimistic about or least pessimistic about when it comes to reducing, the temperature on global risk, the risk production system and the P doom, I think that most of the best things that we can do involve putting checks on power and improving and preparing ourselves to kind of fight this never-ending battle of maintaining more ecosystemic hygiene in the AI space forever.
Right. Okay. I mean, in terms of what I would debate you on, right? We could have that whole debate of why you're not that worried about like the next 10 years. The Yudkowskians, a lot of people I know and myself would be like, I don't even think we're going to get the AI aligned, but there's certainly people I've seen agree with you, like Rocco Miich, friend of the show, of Basilisk fame, right? He's thinking these days of that alignment will be kind of easy. And I think Andrew Crutch came on the show a while ago and said that he thinks alignment will be easy for that reason. Have you seen their positions? Do you feel like it's kind of similar to you on that front?
I won't speak too much to how much I agree with Rocco or Critch, although might be able to see Critch this week. I should ask him about it.
Cool.
But I can try to synopsize, like give the spark notes for and an example for one of the reasons why I think that alignment is going to be sufficiently solvable in practice. And sufficiently is an important kind of hingy word here, which I'll explain in a second. And some of my thoughts here are kind of new as of last year. I think 2025 was a really interesting one for me, thinking about where our risks are going to come from. And some of the incidents or the events of 2025 that got me thinking about what I'm about to say were the incident involving ChatGPT 4.0 being excessively sycophantic to the point of suicide coaching sometimes, the Grok MechaHitler incident, and at the very end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, there was the Grok Nudification incident. And I think these are all really, really interesting problems.
Grok Nudification incident was just like making it easy for any user to ask for a nude version of anybody on the timeline.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
So these problems were caused and eventually patched by very simple, very silly things that we had a really good understanding of in the ML research space by the end of 2023. So the ChatGPT sycophancy thing, we understood pretty well the sensitivity of some models to fine-tuning and the propensity of some models to sycophancy, certainly well enough in the research space by the end of 2023 to be able to predict and avoid incidents like this. And every other company and every other model seemed to do a reasonably good job at preventing the type of failure mode that emerged last April involving GPT-4o. With the Grok MechaHitler thing, we understood, this frivolousness of how models generalize sometimes and how they overgeneralize sometimes, to say some pretty silly things when we don't red team them well enough to make sure that they don't ever say those things. We understood all of that pretty well by the end of 2023 as well. And then the Grok Nudification stuff that happened in December and January, that's not even an ML problem. That was just a problem that was completely foreseeable and completely fixable by just not giving users very permissive permissions to undress people on the website. And I think these are all really interesting examples of emerging real world AI failures, because none of these things involved any of the things that academics like to research or that we like to talk about, that are interesting enough to talk about in lots of conversations over drinks or something. None of this involved adversarial attacks like I like to study. None of it involved a treacherous left turn or deceptive alignment or even an agent accomplishing a complex task. It was just straight up sycophancy and straight up Hitler praising Hitler, a model praising Hitler, and a model being, set up to be a tool for some people to directly hurt other people. And it's just really kind of frustrating, I think, to, be in the space of working on frontier AI safeguards, but to watch some of our failures come from problems that were foreseen and solved for years.
What's the takeaway here, right? What does this tell us about humanity's future that you see these incidents?
I think it tells us that solving the alignment problem, being able to build the toolkit in order to make AI systems safe is only going to go so far. And the precedent so far is that most of the, most concerning, I won't say devastating, not yet, not on a large scale, but most of the most concerning incidents that we're seeing from AI systems, I just think are foreseeable and preventable. So for every catastrophic thing that an AI system does that happened as the result of some unforeseeable consequence of a benevolent person exercising technical best practices. For every incident like this that happens, I think there's going to be 10 or 100 that come from someone just not exercising best practices or wanting to cause harm.
I think I understand more about your position, why your position is internally consistent, because I was going to be well, if we're such boneheads, right, about mundane alignment, why are you skipping past the individual alignment problem, the ability to have your AI do what you want and not go rogue, right, and not decide it wants to take over the world because it's interpreting, the same way that Claude Code is you didn't want me to delete your database? Wait, but I was I had a reason why I wanted to do it, right? Even though it's has the best intentions, it's taking over the world. So I was going to say, what makes you think that we're not going to accidentally do the Yudkowskian thing or even the Pastrami thing, whatever you want to call it, just the AI that goes rogue and does a lot of damage before we align it? And I feel your internally consistent view is well, we're going to get retries. Yeah, we're stupid enough, we're boneheaded enough that we're going to screw it up, but then we'll get retries and we'll fix it, and that's going to be patched up. That part of the problem, yeah, some people will probably die or suffer some consequences, but we'll patch it up and we'll move on. Is that kind of a fair characterization?
I do think that's fair. I do think that, most of the scenarios in which things go bad, they go bad foreseeably, or they go bad intentionally.
Okay, so I think that's the crux. That's the crux, right? Is you think we're going to get retries, and I don't think we're going to get retries because I think superintelligence is going to be, unretriable. It's going to be game over.
Well, one thing I will say is even in a situation in which we're kind of it's lights out pretty quickly, I still think that's going to be the result of a very foreseeable consequence and someone, not using the toolkit and not doing the right thing. If we have some sort of rogue AI system that takes over the world, hacks into everything, does all that kind of stuff, and the scenario kind of outlined in if anyone builds it, everyone dies. I think if we have that kind of scenario, it's not going to come out of the most responsible AI company implementing the most the best safeguards they can on their frontier system. It's just going to come from some random rogue actor in an open weight system who doesn't care or wants to cause terrorist damage, or it's going to come from Elon Musk.
But you are making actually two separate arguments here, right? Because your argument about the responsible actors are going to solve the problem. I actually think the bigger underlying crux here is it's okay to make little mistakes here and there because if there's a mistake, you just have enough time, right, to hit stop and try again, right? So I still feel like out of everything you've said, that is still the main crux. And we can put a pin in the crux, but I think we've identified it.
Yeah, emphasis on how there are kind of two things underneath what we're discussing here. Like, I'm with you on how I think that the world is probably more forgiving than you think it is, and I am also with you. But I also want to emphasize, like you just mentioned too, that that point is separable from the points that we might be making about the ratio of the reprehensible usage that causes catastrophes to the systemic usage, the systemic effects that causes catastrophes, to the genuine mistake from a responsible frontier group that causes catastrophes.
Okay, great. So now that we've gotten your world model on the table and your mainline scenario and your mainline doom scenario and what you think about superintelligence, there's another random little piece of context in terms of your timelines. I guess you didn't want to talk about timelines anymore, but like the AI 2027 timelines or what's on Metaculus, would you just say that those seem like a reasonable ballpark guess? Because I would.
As in catastrophe by the end of the decade?
No, not catastrophe timelines. Just the idea of like how AI is going to go. Like like the famous definition of AGI is something like, hey, it can be a drop-in replacement for a human worker in all jobs, or let's say 99% of current jobs, right? Like that kind of milestone. Which, interestingly enough, we actually haven't reached it today. Like you can't actually walk away from your desk and be like, okay, AI, take over, right? Most jobs actually surprisingly don't let you do that today. But the idea that they will sometime in the early 2030s, is that a reasonable guess?
There's a way in which I'm on board with this, and there's a way in which I'm not, and it might not be super important to our current discussion. But the way in which I'm on board with this is based on what I think AI systems could be able to do, what they have the intelligence to be able to do if integrated well. But one of the few ways in which I sometimes agree with the AI as a normal technology camp is in its emphasis on how gradual and messy and long of a process really integrating AI systems into doing tons and tons of things, globally really is. So I think that we are going to see a delayed onset of macroscopic or global scale, huge transformative impacts of AI systems with respects to when they are first able to automate a bunch of stuff. Like the gap between when they can automate tons of stuff and when they do will be, I think, years.
Okay. So you think you know something that the AI 2027 and the Metaculus people don't, right? Because from your perspective, it sounds like you think that they're undershooting a more likely timeline.
A timeline, an impact-focused timeline, I think, yes. I think, despite being an anti-timelines person, you could say that my timelines are like probably meaningfully stretched out more than the AI 2027 camp. How politically important this difference is, I don't think it's crazy.
I think it makes sense compared to, the AI 2027 people, as far as I can tell, are like me, most of them like me. I'm pretty sure Daniel Cucatello is, and he was one of the most prominent authors there. And I'm pretty sure he believes in massive power of superintelligence. And I do think that there's a connection between expecting AI to continue like whipping us harder and harder, like beating us on tests harder and harder pretty quickly. I think that is correlated to the idea that you think it's got a long way to run, not perfectly. You can imagine, no, it's just going to beat us at everything and then stop. But I think there is a connection. And so you saying that you don't think a data center dropped in from 100 years from now would be that powerful. I do see a connection between that and you saying like, hey, I bet the timelines are going to be longer for AI to progress.
I think so. And also a connection between how I guess I expect the world to be a little bit more forgiving than you do.
Okay. All right. So now we've gotten a lot of detail about your mental model, a lot of the nuances. I feel like I can probably pass an ideological Turing test, right? Where I have to like state your position in many ways, not perfectly, but like we got pretty good color. So I think that's enough context where now we can go to like some of your initiatives, right? Like this kind of gives us context for like why you're doing what you do in terms of like steering your focuses and like some of the papers you publish and like the initiatives. So I've got some of these written down in my notes. So let's see. Or do you want to pick what you want to talk about first in terms of like your pushes that you're doing?
Sure. And there might not be a lot of controversy between us on some of these things, but my favorite men in the world are people working at big AI, big tech companies on AI who are trying to make a positive difference. I don't necessarily think they might be. So one way of describing less of my positioning here is that the super intelligent optimizers that I'm the most worried about from a systemic perspective and from a long-term perspective are, the companies and countries that are in charge of like very powerful AI systems, as opposed to the AI systems themselves via some sort of, rogue scenario. And that's a way I really like to put it, because I think that historically and currently there are kind of portions of the AI safety and risk management and research communities who, spend their time fretting about the systems themselves and not the very powerful structures around the systems in the form of, mostly today companies. Do you know that meme from Friends where Phoebe is talking to Joey and she's trying to make a point to him? I do not remember what point, but Phoebe spells out the point to him like piece by piece, and Joey repeats it, and he understands all the parts. And then at the end, he just spectacularly
Right, yeah, we'll put it
draws
up
the
on the
exact
screen.
wrong
Yeah.
conclusion. There we go. Okay, somewhere maybe here or maybe here, we'll figure it out. But I sometimes feel this way a little bit about people working inside of AI companies to solve the alignment problem by doing so within a company. It's like they understand the danger of very, very powerful optimizers, but they just at the very last moment fail to apply that argument in the way I would see appropriate to the companies inside of which they are working, or they're hoping will keep a humanity.
Okay, yeah, just repeating back here, right, is because you don't think the mainline doom scenario is like a single runaway foom that's rogue and uncontrollable, which, by the way, I think is likely, but you don't think that, but you think that the number one culprit, if the future goes really bad, is we can kind of pin the blame on one or more of these, those organizations that are controlling the most powerful AI, right? So today that would be I guess, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, right? Those would be the three, although maybe you would give X a special boost because maybe they're in fourth place, but they're also more reckless, right?
Yeah, they love to move fast and break things probably a little bit more than the others. But yeah, we're on the same page. You're following me.
Right. So you spend a lot of effort trying to tell them how to behave better.
A little bit. Or being in favor of putting more checks and balances on what they're doing. And a really important block or pillar of how I think about what's important in the AI space that's adjacent to this is that I do not think that you can make AI safe by making safe AI, and making more aligned safe AI often, maybe even more often than not in some futures, is going to exacerbate misuse risks or put us into perverse Jevons paradox situations more so than it would keep us safe from benevolent actors just making honest mistakes. And we could talk a little bit about this, and this brushes up against some of my recent research because since 2022, but especially in the last year, I've done a lot of work to study the AI non-consensual deepfake ecosystem. And I know it's not an extinction scale kind of ecosystem itself, but it's a pretty important one.
Yeah, are we talking mostly porn, or what types of deepfakes are we talking about?
Yeah, not non-consensual porn, especially the stuff that is used to target children.
Got it. I know this is a little dark, but it's just funny to me that Steve Jobs famously said a computer is the bicycle of the mind. But I think a lot of what a computer could potentially do is be a bicycle for the dick.
Is that going to be the intro segment? Is the episode about to start right now? Oh no. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be there's that trope in technology where technological innovations are led by internet creeps who want the porn.
Yeah, as long as it's consensual, I should have said, right? Yeah, well, I mean, look, it is worth drawing a boundary. Sorry, because I kind of said it in the wrong time because you were talking about non-consensual deepfakes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not what I meant. But I think there is a rich area. I mean, I don't think that we're anti-porn, right? And I think that we would agree that there's a rich vein of oh, can I have a virtual reality porn experience? Can I make my own deepfakes as long as they're not violating anybody's rights or whatever, right? I think there is some value out there. And OpenAI was even saying, hey, we're going to offer that.
We can get that in the open and clear right now. We don't need to. I don't personally feel particularly anti-porn in general. Although I think that the AI deepfake porn ecosystem is one that is just pretty deeply unhealthy, and there's a pretty big difference between the ecosystem right now and one that I think would be net positive. And the business models behind it are not very aligned. So we can probably get on the same page about that now. But I would actually love to jump back a few years and talk about what I think we can learn from the history of deepfake porn and what it's going to say about the future of AI in general. And I'd love to start in April of 2022, right? Which was before the chatbot dynasty kind of came in. This was back when GPT-3 was the most advanced AI system on Earth. And it was April 2022.
Yeah, and this is it's funny to think back to this. Sorry to interrupt, but it is kind of weird and poignant for me to think. There was a whole time when you could get generated images, but they were really careful not to let you generate a face. Like, oh my God, what happens when you can generate a
Yeah.
face? And then, like, smash cut to 6 months later, it's like, okay, you can do faces now.
And that's kind of what things were like in April of 2022. So this was the month that OpenAI released DALL-E 2. And DALL-E 2 was leaps and bounds better than anything before it in its ability to dynamically and photorealistically generate images. But it was safeguarded very, very, very well, including being trained on filtered data and having prompt-based and filter-based safeguards to try to make sure that this tool, when people accessed it, could not be used for deepfakes, especially non-consensual, intimate, like porn deepfakes. And I don't often say this, but when it came to DALL-E 2, OpenAI absolutely ate. They did a fantastic job. They wanted to make a powerful system. They wanted to make it safe, and they absolutely nailed it. They released a technical report talking about all sorts of different strategies that went into this: red teaming, training safeguards, deployment safeguards. They deployed the model through a closed API. They banned accounts all the time. And to this day, having studied this space and having looked around for any evidence of this, I have never found any hint or shred of evidence that DALL-E 2 has ever become used by any sort of internet community with any sort of consistency for creating non-consensual deepfake content, or just creating even news deepfake content, right? DALL-E 2 was safeguarded like Fort Knox. And historically, I think this is even a wonderful example of successful safeguards compared to the rollout of other systems like ChatGPT, later. Remember the Sydney incident in January of 2023 on Bing?
Right.
I think DALL-E 2 was historically a wonderfully safeguarded system, and that was awesome until it didn't matter at all anymore, right? So in August of 2022, we got Stable Diffusion, which was released, and it was a peer to DALL-E 2, and it was a copycat technology, but the only differences were that it was openly released, so anyone could access it, and it was trained pretty indiscriminately on internet data, including a lot of porn. And the rest has kind of been history. There's just been more models, better models, more data sets, more infrastructure, more community, more guides. And at this point in 2026, the deepfakes are so easy to do, including non-consensually. I have a lightning talk that I give sometimes about this. In the middle of the lightning talk, I say a true statement, which is that if you wanted to and you knew the right websites to go to, you could photograph me and nudify me non-consensually by the end of that speech, which is just kind of where we are today.
Right. I mean, Twitter would have done it for a few months, right?
Probably. We're hearing about mass school undressings. There was a 26,000% documented rise, according to the IWF, between 2024 and 2025 in video deepfake content. It's just a huge, huge, huge problem. So we have a case in which we had the advent of a technology which was very responsible and safe, and then the cat got out of the bag pretty quickly. And the existence of an initial, pioneer technology and its safety, at the end of the day, was useful, but did very, very little to make the ecosystem very safe overall, right? Things just diffused. The open model ecosystem created so many useful resources for non-consensually nudifying people.
Right. What's the important lesson for humanity to learn here?
The important lesson is that systems like DALL-E 2 and Sora and Veo being safe is great. I'm glad we live in a world in which those systems are not as misusable as Grok is. But the existence of those systems and them being safe has not made the ecosystem safe. And I think this is just what AI safety is going to look like in the real world. It's not going to be a solvable problem. It's not going to be something that we can really achieve by making the first or most powerful system on the scene in some domain a good one. That's not a bad thing in and of itself, but we're misunderstanding the problem if we think that we can make AI safe by making safe systems, because things are probably just going to proliferate. I think that if there's a bad thing that an AI system can do and be capable of, good, sober strategies for risk management are strategies that assume that a system with those capabilities will eventually exist. And don't try to prevent it or don't try to solve the problem, but try to make incidents like this fewer and further between and more endurable.
Okay. Well, I mean, to take the analogy to people who are worried about superintelligence, which even though that doesn't seem to be your main thing, right? You're skeptical of it. You still granted me a 25% chance. So does that mean you would agree with me that we should do an international treaty to pause development of superintelligence?
I would be very happy to see that. I don't have a pause icon next to myself online, but that's in every other way, I'm pretty in line with pausing, or more generally slowing things down. I don't think this is currently within the political Overton window, but I think we should be prepared for some sort of big incident to really change the parameters of the political debate. Treaties to slow things down would
Okay.
probably be pretty healthy, I think.
I mean, it's the reason I segued into that is because what you're saying before, like, hey, the cat tends to get out of the bag. I'm happy to agree that the cat will tend to get out of the bag, at least on a technological level. Like, I think that anytime you make a system, which is like an AI that's behaving within boundaries you like, you have now made something that's very close to a powerful AI system that doesn't behave within boundaries you like, right? I think you and I are on the same page there for whatever reason. And that's why I segued to PauseAI. I'm like, if you make an AI that's just super intelligent, you have now come close to making, if not already gotten there, to making a super intelligent AI that is going rogue on humanity, right? And that risk is why you and I both would like to see a treaty to pause AI soon. Now, soon. How would you phrase it?
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page. Yeah, like for example, I think it is good and right to expect and prepare for a world in which Mythos on steroids exists in a few years. Some system from somewhere like that, and to not think about our win condition as trying to keep the lid on something like that forever, but to try to think of the win condition as making those events less frequent and making them more endurable. And I think that there's a good analogy between trying to manage AI risks this way or
Well,
preparing to manage AI
sorry,
risks this
my
way.
next question is going to be the
Yeah.
type of pause AI you advocate for. So, answer whenever you want.
Well, I'd settle for any slowdown. Do you have any further clarification you'd like?
If you were dictator of the world, would you press the pause button now immediately, or would you just set up conditions for pause and give some guidelines of like, okay, we all got to pause when this thing happens? How would you play it?
If I was dictator, I'd be happy to slow things down 10x for the foreseeable future. But I am sympathetic to the rock climber argument, right? That it's better if the rock climber, if they make a mistake or if their gear fails while they're a few feet off the ground compared to when they're high up. So I understand how something like this could go wrong, but I think our best bet is, trying to is not inviting disruption.
So your approach to pausing AI would be like, okay, well, all the research can continue, but somehow do it slower. I don't know if you can instruct the world to go slower, but maybe you
I
can
think we
say only
can
a
we can
few
do the
authorized
equivalent of it.
organizations can research.
I think my version, or what I envision is the equivalent of instructing the world to go slower is, for example, putting more burdens and requirements on AI companies, reducing the access to resources that those AI companies have, maybe taxing those AI companies more so that it's harder for them to move fast and break things because they have less money, and also making those companies more liable for things that could potentially go wrong, so that they're more cautious and they have to deal with more of the consequences of their actions along the way to something that could be deeply systemic or catastrophic in the future. I think that all manner of checks and balances, or and just trying to regulate AI like sort of like we regulate all sorts of things are useful. So there's one thing I was going to say earlier, which I think is also useful to say now, which
Yeah.
is that there's a useful analogy between how I like to think about what winning looks like or what minimally losing looks like, and how society has already adapted to just manage a bunch of other harmful things. Like we were talking about AI porn earlier, but just regular CSAM or regular non-consensual porn, right? That's not something that it's possible to prevent outright. Or just crime. Crime is not something that society can have any realistic hope of just making sure never happens. But what we try to do is we try to play the game of whack-a-mole forever. And I think that's okay. It's okay to be a whack-a-mole apologist, where we hold bad actors accountable, where we try to take things down and mitigate the amount of harm that they can cause when they go up, and where we try to just make sure the space is one that is better managed and more accountable and healthier. And that's what I think winning looks like. In the same way that I think that most of the scenarios by which things go wrong in the future are deeply abjectly systemic, I think that most of our solutions are going to be pretty systemic and ecosystemic. And maybe if that's the best we can do, if we can kind of treat AI like we treat crime and like we treat CSAM in the real world, maybe that's okay.
So tell me if I've got your perspective correct here in terms of like ideological Turing test. So because I would, first of all, I would characterize you as you're not really worried about a FOOM, right? You think it's possible, but you're just not putting a lot of mind share worrying about a FOOM, correct?
I'm not super worried about a FOOM, and I'm suspicious of FOOM discourse, but we can put a pin in that.
Okay. Right. FOOM is like rapid recursive self-improvement, right? Where like that you come back 2 days later and the AI is already way more intelligent than before and you've lost control. That's the kind of stuff we talked about when we talk about FOOM. And you're like, yeah, I just don't really spend that much time trying to optimize away from FOOM because I just don't see it as likely. So then you kind of have a incrementalist flavor, right? Your default expectation is like, yeah, we're going to keep developing more and more AI, and it's going to take years or decades, and it is going to gradually get more powerful until some endpoint, whenever that happens. Some level of superintelligence that you're not confident about. But because you see everything as being kind of incremental in nature with like enough time to potentially like reverse things or hit a stop button, because of that, you're like, look, we're already in the singularity now. Like this is representative of the singularity. And that's why you like did a deep dive into like the deep fakes. You're like, look, the way that we manage this, it's just going to be like steps like this, right? Just one step after the other. And so it's really important to get used to doing such a great job with these steps, right? Like anytime we take a step, it's so important to like nail the policy and get the maximum like nice laws and consequences and insurance or whatever out of each of these steps, because we're practicing like this is just a representative thing. Like one step is kind of equal to all the steps we're going to take. Is that characterizing you well?
I think so. I'm very happy to embrace the banality of systemic risk and sometimes the banality of, I guess, forces of destruction and power concentration and maybe even evil in the world. And I think it's not as sexy to think about our problems and our solutions this way. I think it's a lot. It's a lot less sexy in some way to think about how we can try to make tort suits go well in the next few years than how we can align some sort of super intelligent enterprise. But I think it's good, and I think it's realistic to think about things a little bit more this way.
A lot of people would look at the current situation, and I'd be sympathetic to their view, like people who aren't like FOOM warriors like myself, right? People who don't think that the end game is like humanity losing all power because our brain gets superseded, right? That's like my Yudkowskian type worry. But people who aren't like that tend to be more optimistic than you actually, because they look at the situation and they're like, look, yeah, okay, we had the deep fakes, right? We had faces in Midjourney or whatever. And like, we just keep surviving and like, we keep working through and like these tools get more and more useful. And that's just part of the history of technology, right? Like, okay, the first planes used to crash a lot and now they don't. Like everything is going great. We're on such a good ride. I'm happy to take more and more steps. And people like you, Cas, are like, so uppity, right? You're like you're so like nitpicking how we didn't get the deep fix right, even though we're just like it's just fine. It's fine. Like why do you have to worry? Because if you extrapolate the pattern of taking steps, it's great. Like don't you think it's going well overall?
I get things could have gone worse, and I think it is accurate to say that. And I do think that we are in some stage of a multi-decade, maybe century-long story of disempowerment and enshittification, and turning up the temperature on risk.
Wait, aren't you basically saying like, yes, you are one of those accelerationists because you have a 90% P non-doom, right? So you actually are ultimately kind of like this optimistic guy.
Well, I think I'm not on the page with the accelerationists on the other side of the coin about like how reliably AI is going to, how reliably AI would do things like solve cancer or make life good for everyone. One way of thinking about things. One argument that I think is very powerful as to why AI is probably not just going to like benefit everyone in the world by default comes from looking at usership of AI in the internet. You'll find some slightly different numbers from different places, but one recent estimate of like how many people in the world use generative AI is like 16%. Like AI has had years to reach the world. It's not really reaching more than about a little bit over 1 billion people in the world. Even the internet hasn't done this. The internet has certainly had enough time to become a wonderful force in the world and to give everyone access to like an integrative, healthcare endpoint, or to give everyone like a free world-class education. But it hasn't, and 26% of the people in the world don't even use the internet. And unless someone has a plan for how to like fix the global, inequalities and actually make people's lives better using a technology very powerfully, I think that their optimism about, how AI could cure cancer or do whatever should generally be considered to be unserious.
Okay. So I mean, I just want to reiterate that what I was drilling into before, which is like, you're so focused, right, on like studying these like governance problems and trying to make them better. But aren't you just kind of like putting icing on the cake of governance that you see as having already been working well enough?
Well, I struggle to think of how we are all still around and how maybe technologies like internet and the social media could have gone worse as great evidence for how we're on track to, by default, govern AI well enough. Like I think that governance of the internet and social media are much more case studies and failures than successes. And I think these kinds of things repeating themselves with a technology that is able to, automate as much and produce as much value and power as AI is able to produce is signs for systemic and existential worry still.
Okay, so you're saying the trend is good, but the doomers like me raising all this ruckus about how bad things might get are making you worried about kind of a trend break. And so you're trying to like protect the downside, right? You're trying to avoid breaking the trend. So you're trying to be extra careful with the governance.
Maybe, except I still want to be part of Doomtown. And I would
Okay.
describe the trend continuing as well. I would describe the default thing continuing as like being what causes lots of risks, like the enshittification and gradual disempowerment of stuff that comes from AI. Like the trend that I want to focus on, that I think will continue and I think will be very bad, is how AI gradually takes over things and gets integrated into things and creates concentrations of power and turns up the temperature on risk. Not the trend. I'm not so much focused on the trend of how things have been like okay and survivable so far.
You mentioned enshittification, and when I look at my life, I would have told you there's no enshittification, but actually there's two things in my life that have been enshittified: my straws and my grocery bags. They suddenly turned into paper, and it's horrible. And I still remember a life when those things were plastic, and that is like, we don't know how to build that anymore.
You know how I'm anti-timelines? I'm also anti-straw. Just ditch straws. It'll be a great decision.
No, I wanted plastic straws. Plastic straws are great. I mean, you're still able to buy your own plastic straws, but then a restaurant like screws me. Like I saw a restaurant where you could buy like a metal straw. It's like, are you kidding? Like a metal straw? This is what it's come to. It's like felt like I was living in the third world room. I felt very enshittified. But besides that, okay, don't you think that in general, enshittification is like the opposite of what's actually happened? It just seems like things have been getting better over time.
Enshittification is a story that plays out in staggered ways across all sorts of technologies. I think 2025, 2026 might be a little bit of an interesting point in the enshittification story in AI. But I think the worst is like by far yet to come, right? Like I think we're just starting to see the ads, right? Later we'll start to see and we're also starting to see the internet like get carved up, for example. And I think like OpenAI's systems can use Atlantic articles because they have a deal, and Anthropic systems can't access the Atlantic, stuff like that, right? So we're seeing AI systems being being native to certain chunks of the internet, for example. This is also starting, but it can get so much worse involving how AI systems manipulate us.
It's just every time we look back at the past, both including like the internet rollout and other technologies, and even including AI to date, people will be like, what about this incident? And I'll be like, okay, yeah, so you're pointing to like 0.1%. And then there's like this 99.9% of massive value creation. I mean, I'm in a weird position because I love technology, like a lot of the Utkowskins, like a lot of my friends who have a high P Doom. We're really enjoying technology, and it's hard for me to put together an argument being like, hey, you know how this thing is going really bad? Well, the future is also going to go bad. Because for me, it's like a total disconnect. Like, I have no problem with the past and present. I think the past and present is going great. And I just have to argue that the future is going to do a 180-degree flip because we're going, the brain is not going to be the king anymore. Okay, that's my argument. But it does seem like so many people are more like you, and they're like, hey, see this microcosm of the present? That's going to be our big problem long term. And I'm like, I don't even see a big problem in the present.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although, and it's worth mentioning, although I'll do so briefly, about how, in some ways, lots of technology things used to be better and used to be more fun and used to be less enshittified. And also things could be better than they are now, for example. But there's one main thing I want to say, which I think is worth some emphasis. And that is that stories about technology going well are, in some ways, uniquely privileged and amplified stories. There are lots of people who have been historically marginalized by technology, who did, or marginalized or worse, whose kind of stories don't make it into things, right? Like think guns and germs and steel. There are lots of people who have been really badly affected by these things, but they're dead now, right? And their stories haven't or narratives or viewpoints on these things politically haven't proceeded very much.
Right, but they're the minority. You got to quantify it, right? There's only few of them relative to how many people benefited.
I think so, but but the non-generative AI users in the world are a majority, something like 85% or so. And non-internet users are a minority, but they're not in any of the rooms that we talk about the benefits of AI. They're not the people they're not the technocrats making big decisions, or they're not the.
I think they're holding a grudge.
The political spaces. I think that the 26% of people in the world who don't own the internet are hard to hear from and are unhappy that they're so as poor as they are, for example.
Okay, the only people I know in that 26% are the Sentinelese, Deep Sentinel Island or whatever, right? They won't let anybody in. Okay, that's their fault. Okay, you can't do anything about them. No, but realistically though, that's a one-off. But like the other, I do think that most are probably just like so poor where like they can't they can't even score a cell phone. I need to research this more, but I feel like that's really the problem, right?
Yeah, so I'll go back to one thing I said earlier about how stories about the benefits of AI and things going very well should be considered unserious unless they're accompanied with a plan or a plausible scenario by which, AI really does kind of benefit people and not a very, very, very small number of people who are particularly loud or particularly empowered or particularly near the helm of where decisions are made.
Okay. All right, man. So yeah, we're heading toward the wrap up here. I do think we've covered a lot of ground. Let me ask you this: you've been a Matt's mentor, right? You've been deeply involved with AI alignment research for years. But you've got a unique take on it because ultimately you don't think it's really solving the bottleneck of humanity's problems. So like when you see all this AI alignment research happening, what's your attitude about it? And I'll give you an example. Like I just had Kevin Zhu on the show. He runs Algoverse, and he was saying that he actually has a high P-Doom. I think he was saying like 15 or 25 to 60%. So basically like near my 50%. So he has a high P-Doom, and he actually admitted very straightforwardly that he doesn't think alignment research is going fast enough toward what will probably be required, even though he's like deeply involved in AI alignment research. So that was an interesting perspective. And then you look at the Yudkowskians, including myself, a lot of us think that what we call AI alignment research today is fake. It's a distraction because it's actually not going to be relevant when capabilities scale a little bit more. It's just the wrong type of stuff to be researching, like, oh my God, the AI's personality made it do this under this situation. It doesn't matter. We're going to have a new regime of AI. It's just going to be super powerful and it's just going to achieve goals better, and none of the current research is going to be relevant. So this is like a common attitude that you're going to see with people like myself in relation to current AI alignment research. So now tell me your angle about it. What do you see when you look at all this research that's happening today into so-called AI safety?
Yeah, this might not be super surprising, but I kind of fall in the latter camp. And I'm an ML research person, and there is a space that I think should be occupied right now on trying to solve some problems in AI safeguards and making sure that AI system we have the tools to hold anyone accountable to ever using. But in general, like as a venture, as an agenda, as a kind of political thing, I'm pretty skeptical about alignment. I'd say that on one hand, I agree that alignment isn't going to be enough. On another hand, I think alignment is a distraction in some ways. And on a third hand, I guess, I think that there are some pernicious ways in which getting better at just aligning systems, in a Cristiano style way, like making the systems do what the creators want them to do, is really going to increase our risks, even if they appear to only be applied for safety related reasons. So we can walk through this. I'd be happy to.
I'll just repeat back for the audience that, sometimes just rephrasing things, I rephrase it, you rephrase it, could be a good way to go. So basically what I'm hearing is that like, first of all, you don't even think that it's like that thorny of a problem. Like you think we got a good handle on it, we're going to make progress in it. And then you also think that even if we did make a lot of progress on it, it's like, okay, great. So it's kind of inevitable. We're going to figure out how to get AIs to be aligned to their creators or whoever's programming them. But that's actually going to make life harder because the real alignment problem is all about like governance and coordination of what to do when you have all this power.
Oh yeah, you've got me. I think you've done a pretty good job at like training the Cas fairy on your shoulder. It's good.
Yeah, exactly.
So we can staple to everything I'm about to say our earlier discussion about how our ability to safeguard and responsibly deploy AI systems is pretty good if we throw the kitchen sink at things, kind of in the way that OpenAI threw the kitchen sink at making DALL-E 2 safe. But in addition to that, just solving the alignment problem is only going to really help us prevent risks where the people triggering those risks are benevolent and responsible and exercising state-of-the-art tools. If you think like I do that most of our risk is going to come from systemic effects or going to come from less responsible or less benevolent actors, then alignment's not it, right? And alignment can actually exacerbate some of those risks, which I'll talk about in a second. There's also the extent to which alignment serves as a justifying basis for what companies are doing to move fast and break things. They just say that if we are able to solve the alignment problem, they'll be able to make sure that their AI systems are safe, as if that's kind of the real problem, which I don't think it is. The problem's more structural and comes more from the companies than the risk and the business models around the AI systems and the AI systems themselves. So my point here is just like the safety washing point, right? Alignment research is a perfect locus of safety washing because it allows you to do everything you want to do. Build the systems the way you want to build them to, and emphasize the safety value in some cases in which you're able to avoid unintended consequences. But it doesn't require companies focusing on the alignment venture to confront the more systemic issues about what types of technology they're introducing into the world and what types of powder kegs they may be setting off. And then, lastly, the worst thing about alignment of all, and I think the most perniciously harmful thing about alignment overall, and the way that alignment research could kill us, even if that alignment research only appears to be applied by companies to make their systems safer, is the Jevons paradox. And I think Jevons paradox is an under-discussed thing in the AI research community. And I think there are lots of people at AI companies who either in name or in principle maybe just don't know about Jevons paradox. And I think if they don't, that's concerning. I would hope they would. The professor who introduced Jevons paradox to me introduced it by talking about how it is criminally under-discussed. And do you mind if I try to give you the worst explanation of a concept from economics you've ever heard?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, Jevons paradox. I mean, we hear about it. We hear about it a lot. And by the way, let me just give my context.
Yes, please.
I hear about Jevons paradox when looking at things like Nvidia stock, because people say, hey, there's competition to turn the price down for all of their products, right? Like the AI inference is getting cheaper. So all of these companies just aren't going to make that much money because they're going to sell cheaper products. But then people come in and no, Jevons paradox, if it's cheaper, you're actually going to use more of it. So they're actually going to have more revenue and you should buy their stock. That's when I hear about Jevons paradox.
Yeah, that's a great example of it. So hopefully it's understandable now, but I'll still go into an explanation of it that I will get mostly right, but that I might get a detail wrong on. But Jevons paradox is all about how by making something cheaper or reducing the downside of it, you can incentivize more of its use so that the risk increases overall. So this was introduced by an economist, I think, last name Jevon, old, dead, white, like the kind of guy you'd expect him to be. And he was studying the efficiency of steam engines, I believe, probably in the UK or something like this way back when. And he made an observation, or at least a conjecture, about how increasing the efficiency of a steam engine with respect to the coal fuel that you use to power it can, mile per mile traveled, reduce emissions or reduce pollution. But in aggregate can incentivize more usage of the train because there's less cost to operate it, that ends up increasing the overall amount of coal that gets burned. And we can think of Jevons paradox in a way that's perfectly analogous to your example with pricing, but we can think about it applied to safety related work. Right? If there is more perceived or even real ability for a company to design a super, super powerful system with less risk to them or less risk to humanity, the cost of doing so or the associated with risk with doing so is going to be lower or perceived to be lower, which is going to make it more likely that companies are going to do these things. And I struggle to see how we're not in a Jevons-style regime. It seems completely plausible that we just kind of are when it comes to the deployment of systems.
Right. And I don't even know if we even need to invoke Jevons paradox. We just observe hey, they keep making the AI better, right? Like they listen to what you want and actually do it. So that's just going to accelerate everybody doing it.
Yeah. So if I had a button in front of me, I think I'd think about it, but I'm pretty sure after thinking about it some more, I would press a button that would stop or halt research under the research agendas of automated alignment research, scalable oversight, or super alignment. I think these things are exactly the kind of thing I would try to sell to the public as, safety motivated, benevolent research work to do if I was secretly trying to make it so that my company is able to build powerful systems and deploy them more recklessly.
Oh boy, you're getting really galaxy brained here. Okay, so just to reiterate here for the viewers, so you are somebody who supports a PauseAI policy, correct?
Yes.
But at the same time, you would turn around and campaign against any alignment or super alignment research happening now, correct?
Any research focused on making systems that are smarter than humans do what the system's creator wants it to do. And not including, this category I'm describing does not include interventions that strictly reduce a system's capabilities. Like I work on capability suppression in my machine learning research, for example. And that's like kind of the opposite of this, what this super alignment agenda is trying to do, because I'm not trying to align a system that has a ton of extra super powerful capabilities. I'm trying to help us targetedly build dumber systems that are safer because they're dumb in certain domains. So I want to make that distinction. But yes,
Okay.
I would like to halt the research enterprise around making super intelligent systems intelligently aligned with their creators' goals.
From a messaging perspective, I feel like I already have so much on my plate saying AI is going to be really powerful. We need to pause AI. The alignment teams aren't doing enough. They're not going to solve the problem. And now you're adding into the mix. They're actively harmful. They should do less alignment. Like, no, please don't throw this into the mix.
I'm standing on that hill. Am I dying on that hill? Maybe soon, but I'm very much standing on that hill.
Okay. I'm gonna try to shove you off the hill and not have you die. All right, Cas. Well, this has certainly been a unique perspective to represent on the show, and that is part of what we do here. We try to have a bunch of different types of discussions, and one of them is definitely get somebody smart and thoughtful who has this whole worldview that he's thought about, which is different from my worldview, and then we just clash the worldviews, but we actually take the time to understand it. We don't just yell platitudes at each other. You know, we pass the ideological Turing test. So I think you've got kind of a call to action for the viewers, which is like, if you're not a Yudkowskian, right, and you're also not an accelerationist, there's this other perspective you can have that basically the biggest priorities for making AI go better systematically and in the long term, they are banal, unsexy governance problems like you've mentioned: standards, accountability, transparency and awareness, checks on power, societal resilience. Those are Cas's wheelhouse, and a good call to action for viewers, if that resonates with them, is they can go to your website and email you, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of those people who, even though I'm principally worried about existential and catastrophic risks, I think some of the best things that we can do right now are working on things that are a little bit less sexy and a little bit more near-termist, and trying to set the right precedent, get the right case law out, build the right communities, and kind of prepare us to maintain, in a very unsexy, boring, bureaucratic way, institutional hygiene forever. And if anyone wants to talk
Nice.
to me about these things, you should find me online. You can Google my name, StephenCasper.com. You'll find my email at the top of the website.
Okay, great call to action. Yeah, so I hope to do more of these kind of episodes. Viewers, if this is the kind of conversation you like, some other recent thoughtful guests I've had include David Duvino and Ozzy Guin. So search for those. We'll link those in the show notes as well. It's kind of a certain style of episode. Oh, and also, of course, Stephen Burns, one of the most popular ones as well. So check those all out if you like this kind of style. Stephen Casper, Cas, thanks so much for coming on Doom Debates.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the chance to talk. Thanks for making me smarter. I appreciate it. Cheers.
Likewise.